Conversations Group and Queen's School of Law International Women's Day event. My name is Eileen Weir, as I have to remind myself whenever I write a few words, I keep forgetting to say who I am. I'm a Scholar Emeritus at the Transitional Justice Institute in Ulster University, and I'm a member of the Constitutional Conversations Group. So before we go any further, can I ask you to switch off your camera and go into mute, everyone except the panel. You're very welcome here today, and I'm delighted to be inviting the panel this year to celebrate International Women's Day. Today's event was postponed from last year due to the COVID crisis. At that time, constitutional conversations were already flourishing. In the year that's followed, universities across these islands have begun major research projects on the subject. The Taoiseach's office has set up a shared island unit, and voices defending the union are gaining momentum, both locally and in Westminster, particularly in the face of Scotland's predicted departure from the United Kingdom. Added to this picture, the outworking of Brexit and the protocol have energised calls to prepare for a union unity referendum as a sure way for Northern Ireland to return to the European Union. In all of this, women have been highly active and visible in civic and political leadership, in the debate, in the research, and in the organisation of events. The main focus of constitutional conversations and events so far has been the practical implications of Irish unity in the fields of health, education, economics, governance, and the environment. The focus of today's panel is the gender impacts of constitutional change on women's and other marginalised lives. Given that women comprise over 50% of the population, are a disproportionate number of the low paid, are overrepresented in health and social care work, and remain underrepresented in political and public life, we view this contribution as overdue. It may have been timely a year ago. This year, it's well overdue, and we hope it's the start of many such conversations. So some questions. What would a woman-friendly constitution look like? Would such a constitution benefit other marginalised people? How might a woman-friendly constitution come about? And what steps should be taken to ensure that marginalised lives are a core constitutional matter? The Constitutional Conversations Group and Queen's Law are grateful to the panel of remarkable women we are about to hear from. They bring to the table a breadth of experience and a wealth of knowledge to aid us in thinking about these things. In alphabetical order, they are Fidel Mahesh. Fidel, as I mention a name, will you just raise your hand, please? Fidel Mahesh is a feminist thinker and writer. She is an academic at Ulster University in the Transitional Justice Institute and is noted for her research on masculinities, feminism, and nationalisms, and her work with members of the LGBTQI community. Catherine Cook coordinates the Foyle Women's Information Network. She has over 30 years' experience in the community and voluntary sector, where she's gained experience in building inclusive alliances to tackle inequalities. She is a member of the Peace for Partnership. And one of the things I've wondered, Catherine, is, are you the only member who started your working life in the local shirt factory? Myrtle Hill is a feminist historian and visiting research scholar at Queen's, where she was the Director of Women's Studies. She has published widely on Irish women's political, religious, and social history, and is currently researching links between feminism and the left in Irish history. She is active in the wider women's and community relations sectors in the north of Ireland. Susan Mccrory coordinates the famous Falls Women's Centre, set up in 1982 on the basis that any subject women wanted to discuss could be discussed. The centre is now a hub for childcare, training, support and women's activism. With her lifetime of community development experience, Susan is at the heart of the hub. Anne Mcvicker has 35 years experience in the women's sector. She is the director of the Women's Research and Development Agency and formerly helped to establish the forerunner to the thriving Shankill Women's Centre. She's a founder member of Reclaim the Agenda that organises International Women's Day activity in Greater Belfast, and I would urge you to visit their site for other events this week and for events that you may have missed. Eileen Weir, in a sense, brings up the rear, but she's far from the last. Eileen Weir has over 30 years experience in building good relations. She works in the Shankill Women's Centre and is a respected coordinator of the Greater North Belfast Women's Network. In 2018, she was awarded Community Relations Council Exceptional Achievement and also the Mccrory Civil Rights Award. That was a busy year for you, Eileen. So I have some questions for the panel coming up. And my first question is, I think there's two parts to it really. Why is a constitution important for women? And why is the wording of a constitution important for women of all backgrounds? And Fidelma, I'll start with yourself. I'm sure some of my feminist sisters will be saying that alphabetical order should go by first name. I think you're still in the running in that case. But if you would address that question for us first, please. You're mute. Okay.
Am I okay?
You're okay.
So I was just saying thanks, Eilish, and happy International Women's Day, everybody. What a topic, what a question, and more questions now. I looked at the question, a woman's constitution, a small statement with big implications. So I had to take a deep breath when I started to think about it in all its complexity. And I thought about a quote from Margaret Drabble, who was an anti-war activist. And she commented that when nothing is certain, everything is possible. And that brought to mind two things, that quote. The first was that it seemed to reflect our current state of sort of constitutional flux. But it also, I think, reminds us that while change and flux bring challenges, they also bring opportunities. So suppose the question that the organisers gave us was to imagine how constitutional debate and constitutional shifts could generate some thinking or some imagining about what a woman's constitution would look like. In my own imaginings about that, I turned to the work of a North American writer called Nancy Fraser. And the reason was that she argues that there are three components of gender justice. And I think that those components can be applied to a woman's constitution, or certainly a constitution that reflects a society's aspiration to ensure that women have full equality under the law and in other ways as well. So Fraser's first component is representation. And I think that's a really interesting component of social justice, gender justice to talk about at the minute. because there are conversations going on all around us. And in terms of constitutional change, constitutional design, or constitutional redesign, and it's really important that women, from Fraser's standpoint, would have parity of esteem in those conversations. So her argument is that historically marginalised groups, if they're going to secure gender justice, must be included in conversations, policy making. They must influence the debates. So I suppose in terms of conversational constitutions, the questions that feminists would ask is the current process of debate open and participatory for women? What are the mechanisms for inclusion? And if the answers to those two questions haven't crystallized yet, then we need to ask, well, why? Also, what are the barriers and risks of inclusion for women, and for specific women? What are the risks involved in that? So another question that springs to mind, having been an observer of Northern Irish politics for a while, is important questions for us. Who speaks for women? Who speaks about women? And when they speak about women, what do they say about women? So I think those are all really important questions. And regardless of the complexity of women's identities in deeply divided societies, from my point of view, the issue of representation and inclusion and meaningful inclusion of a wide range of women would seem to be really important. Now, Fraser's other component of social justice revolves around socioeconomic rights. So she argues this is a really crucial aspect of gender justice. And what you need is a recognition that the society's goods, not just economic, but social as well, have to be redistributed in a fairer way. So I suppose the question again for feminists to think about is how do we include those kinds of issues in current and future debates? And I was thinking, do we need to invoke a Bill of Rights? And there was a great discussion about that on Friday evening. Do we need something like a constitutional convention in one or both jurisdictions to think these issues through? Or are there other ways? Are there other ways that, you know, we haven't thought about? Are there examples from other regions? But socioeconomic rights would seem to be really important. And the last component of Fraser's theory of gender justice, social justice, is recognition. And that, I think that connects quite well with the issue of, you know, constitutions. Constitutions have a symbolic function, and they set out the values and the vision of the society. And a case could be made that in any constitution that presents itself as a woman's constitution, a constitution for women, a constitution that preserves women's political interests, there should be some recognition of the harms of the past, the gender harms of the past. And I think, wouldn't it be lovely to see something in a constitution that aspired to secure women's equality in all their diversity and all their different political standpoints? So look, those were my thoughts. As I say, it's a big question, and thanks to the organisers for posing it, and thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to hearing about what everybody else's thoughts are on the issue.
Fidelma, thank you very much. That's terrific. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Eilish.
I'll move to Catherine. Hello,
Thank
Catherine.
you very much. Hello, Eilish. How are you? And
Good.
thank you for the invitation to speak today. On those kind words you said, thank you very much. I'd like to reiterate what Fidelma says. Happy International Women's Day. It's 110 years since the first day, and we are still seeking equality. So we'll choose the challenge and we'll strike that pose. Like Fidelma, I listened to a few wise women saying a few wise words on Friday evening about a Bill of Rights and a Bill of Rights for women. And this question about a constitution for women, and it was a really, really big question that you asked of us, and it was a challenge. And I thought, and when I was thinking about the Bill of Rights, sure, we don't even have a Bill of Rights for everyone that was promised 23 years ago in the Good Friday Agreement. And from the slot of the speakers on Friday night, I sensed frustration and tiredness and an expectation that this would be delivered to us, not by us, because there was a constitution, or there was a consultation process that went out over Christmas, but a lot of people missed it.
Yes.
A lot of people hadn't the opportunity to consider it. So this will be, is there an expectation for us that our politicians will deliver this for us? And then that leads me on to a few further questions. Does our government look like us? Is it reflective of us? Is it reflective of society as a whole? Is our society fair and just? Is our social norms fair and just? It leaves me with more questions than answers. We live in a patriarchal society, and this is embedded in our everyday life. And I feel that we need to understand patriarchy and how patriarchy works and its whole construction before we can set out to change it or challenge it. You know, things like who is the breadwinner, who likes to wear blue, who likes to wear pink, what jobs are girls or boys suited to, you know. Even if you look at the Irish Constitution and the debates around Article 41.2, you know, it can be interpreted in many, many different ways. However, the principle of equality between men and women, or gender equality, is this idea that all human beings, regardless of your sex or face, are free to develop your own personal abilities. You're free to pursue your professional career and to make choices without any limitations set by stereotypes, rigid gender roles, and prejudice. So if we were to get one today, are we ready for it? Do we know what it would look like? Would we even have a say? Or will our politicians deliver this for us? You know, in America, when they talk about the Constitution in America, they talk about the founding fathers. Where were the founding mothers? And for me, what we need is a pincer movement to move this forward so that we're not talking 110 years later or 23 years later, as the Bill of Rights is, that we need a pincer movement. We need a groundswell from the grassroots community, but we also need the government and those in power to want it as well. So it needs to be top down and bottom up. So that people feel that a Bill of Rights is for them and it's not a stick to beat us with. And I'll end it there.
That's terrific. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Myrtle, I'll turn to yourself. You're on mute, Myrtle, you're on mute. Can you see the button there at the bottom? of the screen. Fidel, you're also on mute. If you're trying to join in, you're also on mute. I think everyone else is muted.
It's at the top of my screen, Myrtle. If you look at the top, no, it's not there. Gillis, you can't unmute. Myrtle.
No, it's Declan who's got I'll have a look and see if I can. Let me just see. Is that it? Try now? Oh, no.
No. Let's see.
How annoying. Myrtle, what we'll do is we'll come back to you. Is that okay? Can you hear me okay, Myrtle? Yes, we will come back to you. I'll move on to Susan, hoping I can see her mic is muted as well, and hope that she's okay. And we'll come back to you, Myrtle, after Susan. Susan's okay.
Okay, so I'm unmuted now, yes.
You're okay.
I felt like I was back at school and writing stuff in about a constitution. And so I fully agree with the last two speakers. And so I don't want to reiterate what they have said. But when I was thinking of, what's a constitution look like, and one of the things I was saying was language is a big barrier. So even if we were to go off and start, the dream of writing up a constitution, the biggest thing we would have to look at is the language of how that's written, so that every single woman could understand what it says. And even to get engagement and discussion, to bring it down to a grassroots level, then it has to be designed in such a way that every single woman understands what the future of our constitution looks like. It can't be taken off and wrote by politicians and academics and, so many people put this into the consultation and that was it. Because there's so many women missed out of consultation processes that at the end of the day it wouldn't really carry great weight. Right. The other thing I was actually thinking was, we would, if you were to consider writing a constitution, you'd be writing about it in the here and now. Well, what if we put ourselves 100 years from now? And so something that we wrote 100 years ago still holds, and it doesn't suit. So I think it's even looking at a future for us and for our generations to come. It's not just looking at, stuff that's current. You want to make something that carries 20 years from now, 30 years from now. So it's looking at that. I think if we talk about the North and a constitution for women, there's so many different pathways to that constitution. Is it an All-Ireland constitution? Is it a North of Ireland constitution? Is it a United Kingdom constitution? So there is other discussions that are required when we look at a constitution. Catherine touched on the Good Friday Agreement. And one of the things we've actually identified, even within the Good Friday Agreement, Section 75 was to be the be-all and end-all in terms of equality. But we now recognise that women should have been, it should have been gender specific. Something in Section 75 should have been for women only, because of the difference in men and women, and because of the barriers, and because of all the issues that a woman faces within her life. You can't stick it under the one thing. Our whole thing would be, who's it going to benefit? So if I was a part of something that was going to be put down on paper, I'd like to think it's going to benefit my daughter, my grandchildren, my granddaughters, granddaughters. you know, it's passed down in history. I'm just trying to remember what else I wrote. I looked at the piece of work you give us in terms of the Scottish Gender Roadmap. And I actually thought that was a good idea. Again, one of the things is the roadmap's not really going to come to fruition until 2030. I might be here. So, you know, again, time something. And then the last thing I actually give consideration to was, if we want to talk about gender and gender equality and women, it's not just us. It's looking at an education system that goes right into the heart of school and begins to make change there. Because even with a constitution, it's a piece of paper. To change a constitution, you have to go through years and years of legislation. Whereas if we actually had some education system that made people understand gender equality, gender difference, and it's in your education system, if we're moving towards a better society, there are other ways of also looking at it. And one of the final things I read in the Irish Times, I don't always get the Times, but I just happened to get it at the weekend. In the south of Ireland, they're now looking at menopause and women in the workplace and how that affects, you know, how menopause has a great effect on women moving forward. You know, so it's to me, I thought that was brilliant. The other side of me was going, how would that work in a business world, in a society where your boss needs you in work and you have responsibilities? So there's a lot to be taken on a constitution. My biggest thing would be bring it to the women on the ground, make it a language they understand, and make them feel that they've actually took part in designing and creating something for a long-term future.
Susan, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was terrific. Anne, can we turn to you now to give us your thoughts?
Okay, thank you.
Anne, can I ask you, just before we start with you, for Myrtle's benefit, how did you unmute?
Just at the top of your screen on the right hand side, there's a number of wee icons, and there's your microphones. Just click on that and that'll take you off mute.
That's not the case for Myrtle, obviously. Go ahead, Anne.
Okay, afternoon everybody, and thank you, Eileen, for the invitation. And today, being the 8th of March, I want to send solidarity, International Women's Day solidarity greetings to all of you. I feel a bit like you, Susie. Whenever Eileen contacted me, whenever it was cancelled from last year, this event, and then her persistence in coming back on it again, and I noticed that she sent out the invitation well before RTA sent out all their dates, so you got in there very wisely, Eileen. But I felt like you, Susie, because I had to start Googling things, you know, like what is, you know, examples of best practice, women's constitutions, etc. So actually, thanks for that, Eilish, because I learnt a wee bit, you know. So why, first of all, I suppose, constitutions, why is it important for women? Constitutions are important for women because a constitution is the fundamental legal expression between the state and its citizens. And it brings together sort of like three branches. So you would have the executive in terms of sort of like the day-to-day, you know, the day-to-day authority and responsibility for the administration of the state. It brings together the legislator. So that's about passing laws and amending and appealing and accepting budgets, and then it brings together the judiciary. So that's the system of courts that interprets and applies the law in the name of the state. And good practice approach to this arrangement is that to ensure that the three branches of the state have separate and independent powers and areas of responsibility, and that there's a balance of power between the different branches. So we all know that that the UK doesn't have a written constitution, and actually there's another two countries that don't either, New Zealand, and given sort of like the Jacinda Ardern's just the way she has governed, and you know, and even sort of like done such a great job through COVID. I was actually quite surprised that they don't have a written constitution, and Israel as well doesn't have a written constitution, but that probably comes as no surprise. However, there are may not have a written constitution, but you do have common law, and you do have precedents, and that make up our constitution. Constitutions are great because what's in the constitution trumps anything in domestic law. So you want to get it. You want to get those rights into the constitution. And looking at the question that you put, Eilish, about sort of like an all Ireland and possibly like a new constitution, there could be difficulties ahead, because trying to amend a constitution can be very difficult. You know, look at the Irish Constitution in terms of repealing the Eighth Amendment, yes. And also there was the equal marriage, etc., and I think even divorce as well. That all had to go to referendums.
Yes.
You know, in order to change the constitution. So really, it's important to enshrine those rights, women's rights, in the constitution from the very beginning. So it's got me thinking here now. So if we were to, you know, have sort of like I wouldn't say a united Ireland, but a new Ireland and a new framework, I think that we would be looking at a new constitution. Whether that's even legally possible, I really don't know. But what I do know is that in writing a constitution, that, and Susie referred to it, it is about language, gender inclusive language. You know, it's both legally and symbolically important. You know, I mean, Catherine, you referred to the American Constitution and about the, you know, the fathers, etc. And although they would say that the language, you know, refers to men and women, I think that that's very dangerous, you know, in having that language. So we really need to have gender inclusive language, like he, you know, him, she, her, etc. And there needs to be gender specific provisions as well. So gender equality and non-discrimination and political rights, that, yeah, you know, they need to be referred to. Social rights and protections, and economic rights and protections, and special measures, and possibly temporary special measures as well. So there needs to be, that needs to be basically at the crux in the drawing up of any, you know, of any constitution, and certainly a new constitution, let's say, for Ireland. What in terms of Bill of Rights? Bill of Rights usually sort of like can sort of like define the relationship between the state and its citizens. That would be the purpose of a bill of rights, which can run alongside sort of like a constitution. Again, I don't know in the UK, with the UK, because we don't have a written constitution, about whether again a bill of rights would actually do the job for us. I'm not sure legally of the position there. I can see sort of like the relevance in other countries that have constitutions, but I'm not sure whether that will work for us. And in fact, it brings me back to all of this work that's going on at the minute. Just because it was in the New Decade, New Approach about drawing up a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland, whether that's even feasible, possible, or whether it's just a big red herring. And I tend to think it's just a big red herring, because actually it's Westminster that would be tasked with actually introducing and legislating for a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland, if that was to be the case. I think as well that you think of the Irish Constitution and about the position that women were sort of like put in, in terms of sort of like being they were I forget the word that's in it, not adored, but they were sort of like adored, because they were because they were running the homes, their homes and responsibility for children and families and whatnot. And we've seen sort of like how that's played out over the years, that it wasn't good for women, the Irish Constitution, I know that there's a number of the amendments that have been repealed, and I know that's ongoing. There's other amendments there's work going on at the minute presently to repeal other amendments as well. So I think that, as I say, come back to language is all important here. You can't, I think I agree with Catherine. This is a patriarchal, society, and so you can't carry on sort of like using that traditional sort of like language. This has got to be new. This has got to be innovative. Whenever we talk about even gender inclusive language, we're talking about even gender budgeting, and all of that has to come into it, because women at the minute, we live in a very unequal society, and I can't see by chipping away, that at sort of like the edges that is going to enhance equality in any way, much as I wish that it would, but and I'm not sort of like being negative here. I think I'm just being realistic. So I think I leave it just at that, Eilish.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was terrific. Thank you. Before I turn to Myrtle, who looks like she's ready to roll in, could I ask anyone who's not on the panel to go into mute and turn their cameras off? Anyone not on the panel, to mute, please, and turn your camera off. Thank you. Myrtle, well done.
I came in on a different screen. Can you hear me okay?
Great.
So what that meant was that I've missed bits, I'm afraid. Thank you, Eilish, for the invitation, and as always from you, a challenge. First of all, I should say that I think just having International Women's Day is just so important, and I wish we could talk more about these things every day. However, it's inevitable that I'm sure I'll be repeating a bit what other people say, but I'll just get on with it. It's a very timely, I think, to be thinking about constitutional change and what implications that might have for women. In the whole lengthy debate around Brexit, concerns for the specific possible consequences for women were rarely voiced. And we can already see the impact on us as consumers and for many women workers, and real concerns around loss of access to a legal system outside our own. Scotland's path to independence seems more advanced than that of Ireland, and no doubt discussions and movement there will affect us, and it's worth keeping a close eye on. In the meantime, we're here in the north, caught in a kind of no man's land between the jurisdictions of Europe and Britain, and of course Ireland within that. It's also estimated that this pandemic has set women's equality back by about 24 years, a state of flux indeed, Fidelma. On representation, while it is of course important that women are numerically significant in our political system, it's surely clear today that numbers alone are insufficient in bringing about gender equality or justice. The party system, particularly in a divided post-conflict society such as ours, ensures that all too often vital issues, including gender-related social, medical, legal, and both personal and social rights, are either marginalised or considered in the light of divisive party political views. Both first and second wave feminists, from suffragette to the 1970s women's movement, faced the same difficulties, and often indeed were divided themselves because, of course, and this is part of the problem maybe, we're not just women. We have all those other identities ourselves. Achieving true diversity, which is not only inclusive of gender, sexual orientation, race, disability, and so forth, but gives parity of esteem to these categories and respects and responds to their concerns, seems indeed like a very big ask in the current political climate. It's outside the formal political arena that we can see the potential for change amongst human rights advocates, in women's activism in the voluntary and community sector. And I personally have a strong belief in the power of informal, accessible, educational discussions of our histories, and of course projects such as this. We need to ensure that we can feed pressure from these into places where power is situated. While quotas are useful in bringing in women's experiences and their contributions, I think we need a more sophisticated set of mechanisms to ensure that a wider range of concerned voices is heard. It's within political parties, they're after all the gatekeepers, that change is most needed. And I've been impressed, thank you for sending the links, Eilish, by the various toolkits that are currently being developed, where they're doing things like insisting on the importance of collecting and analysing the data on all of us human beings, on having consultations with stakeholders, a whole widening of the political arena. The Canadian example I thought was very interesting, where the Status of Women group in Canada reach out to a range of sectors, federal governments, academia, civil society, frontline service providers, survivors of violence, and so forth. They have roundtable discussions with all stakeholders, plus online surveys and emails, and an advisory council of government and civil representatives, a forum for the exchange of ideas and the promotion of policies. The state of Victoria in Australia is similarly reaching out. Any changes to our constitution must be preceded by this kind of wide consultation and not reliant on a sectarian headcount. What would it look like? The language needs to be gender neutral, of course, and perhaps we should beware of being too specific about categories, as these can change and new marginalised groups emerge. And indeed, the intersection of our various identities can be ignored in a general listing. Us old feminists will still proclaim that the personal is political. Policies on care, more generally, and of course childcare, schooling, education, jobs, the economy, these issues need to have the input of a range of women's voices and opinions. Moreover, they need not only be robust enough for our everyday experience, but as we are seeing now, they need to withstand emergencies, both man-made and natural disasters. This current pandemic has had a huge impact on these aspects of our lives, but there has been very little reference to our specific situations through our various lockdowns and indeed the plans for unlocking. As a historian, I'm aware that historical injustices can be recognised and progress made, however slowly, and that constitutions can be changed. Much more challenging is our culture, though we have, of course, seen the negative consequences of historical abuse on the power of today's Catholic Church. So, through all the distress of our current uncertainties, there are opportunities, I think, in some kind of new normal that everybody keeps talking about. Maya Angelou said, if one is lucky, a solitary fantasy can transform a million realities. Let's not rely on luck to achieve our fantasies. Amongst us are surely leaders who can pave the way. A nice quote from former First Lady Rosalind Carter. A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. And I think that's our task. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Myrtle. I'm really glad you got to be unmuted. That was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here we go now, Eileen. Over to you. Thank you.
It's actually not funny being last because nearly everything that I would want to have said has been said, but I'm sure I'll be able to get something out of it. And again, thank you, Eilish, for torturing me to be on this Teams meeting, and a happy, phenomenal International Women's Day, because it's not about challenging it, it's about every woman's phenomenal in their own way and in their own right. So, you know, we've covered bits there about the Bill of Rights. You know, suppose I maybe on Friday night I was one of those ones that was frustrated when we started talking about the Bill of Rights and talking about what we need to get in it. The way the Constitution was carried out was a disgrace, because the ordinary people didn't get an opportunity. The language that it was, the way the questions were put, you know. So if there was going to be a Constitution, it has to be in my language, everyday language that I use. I don't use big words. I can't even pronounce big words. My education let me down. I'm not a very good reader, but I get there. So it has to be in a language that everybody uses. Even the things that we do at this minute in time, it takes a retraining ability to for people to access. You know, 4 weeks training I had to do with a group of 12 women just to get them to connect to Zoom meetings. So, you know, that's how critical it is. Not everybody's media technology or go on to social media. It's a big, if there was to be a constitution, it's a big piece of work. And we have to learn from our past and make sure that we don't put something in it that's gonna penalise us in the future, because whoever who's in government today, and we found that with the Good Friday Agreement, will not be in government in 25 years' time. So it has to be government proof, not only gender proof, it has to be government proof, because people read into things the way they want to read into things. You know, I had an opportunity through the women's sector to work in the prison for a couple of days a week, along with Breach from Falls and Hazel, who's no longer with us, from Windsor. And even that, till today, isn't fair on the way women get their sentences and the crimes that women are actually committing. A lot of them's down to their mental health, a lot of them's down to feeding their family, a lot of them's down to addiction because of their mental health. So we have a system there that doesn't work already, and there's been many's a report put in about the way that has happened. The other thing that I always like to throw in there, we need to promote our feminist men, because there's plenty out there. And if we include our feminist men who are behind us and who are supporting us, I've listened to some men and there's some husbands of some feminists, and they're better feminists than their wives in some cases. So, you know, yes, it is about women, but we have to include are people who are feminists, who maybe be men, and that's the case. Because if we go down the line, you know, a constitution just for women and a constitution for women, yes, but we have a lot of feminist men out there who would love to get a wee bit of work on that too. So we can't afford to leave anybody behind here, because the more people we can get on our side, the more opportunities that we'll get. You know, the Good Friday Agreement, and Anne spoke about the executive, the legislative and the judicial of branches. But if one of them break, they all break. So we need to make sure, like the Good Friday Agreement, the 3 strands, if one falls, the other 2 doesn't work. So we have to make sure that whatever comes, I don't know if we could get that work done, because at the minute we're working on the Bill of Rights. We're working on still trying to implement parts of the Good Friday Agreement, 23 years on. And as a community worker who works at grassroots level, you know, we're burnt out. We're burnt out. Because of the pandemic, one, but even before the pandemic, we were already burnt out as community workers. So, you know, we don't do the work to get the thanks for it or the pay, because, you know, we're not up there, and we have to wait every year to see if we're going to get paid. You know, it's not long-term funding by no means. And I think things like that we need to be looking at, that's within our control now, to try and lobby for and get, you know. The other thing too, which is going to come out at the other end of this pandemic, that we have a Protect Life strategy that was to cater for mental health. It has failed. It has failed. We have another new Protect Life strategy, because the other one was 10 years ago, maybe longer. And, you know, if we don't get our mental health with strategies and with stuff that we already have there, then I don't have time to talk about a woman's constitution. But what I do have time to talk about, every party should have a woman's minister, to make sure that the women's agenda doesn't leave the table within their parties. And it should be part of every political party to have that woman's minister. And if they don't want to have a woman's minister, or just have a label of a woman's minister, then we should elect a woman's minister of our own. And maybe some of the stuff that we have been fighting for on the ground, and still fighting for on the ground, will be listened to, in the light of not having a civic forum, which was in the Good Friday Agreement. So a lot of stuff that we are actually looking for, we can actually access what we actually voted on, which came out at 71%, which was the Good Friday Agreement. And until we have everything within the Good Friday Agreement on the table, and everybody benefiting from it, of what already was in it, then why do we bring something else into the fore, when I'm constantly fighting for the rights of what was in the Good Friday Agreement? And you know, Catherine had said about 23 years on, we're still talking about the Bill of Rights, and we are only talking about it. They're not telling us we're going to get it. You know, they've set up that hop hog committee to look and consider, and that's the wordings, to consider a Bill of Rights. Now, to me, there should be no consideration in it. We should have it. And especially coming out of Europe, we have lost our European Charter of Human Rights. So we have lost more rights by coming out. Now, yes, we have the European Union, the bigger body, the Commission, but the UN Charter was a better human rights charter than that was, because it improved on it. The first one was out after the wars to make sure things like that didn't happen again. And then the EU came up with their charter, which bettered the other one. Now, we've lost that. That concerns me more than a constitution for women at this minute in time. I'll leave it there because everybody else has said everything that I think needed to be said. And conversations like this should continue. And if it is to come to fro, then it should be from grassroots up, not from top down. And it should, and I mean grassroots. I mean the women I'm working with on the ground. They should have their say. As equal say as what I have, as an equal say as what Myrtle has, and as an equal say as what Anne has. We all, if we don't treat each other equal, we have a cheek to ask the government. And it's a sad, sad state of a fact that the governments, the fact that we're even talking about it and we're even looking at it, our governments, both the UK and here in Stormont, have let us down badly. The fact that we're even talking and having this conversation, the fact that we'll even talk about a united Ireland, and if people voted for, know who to blame? You blame the British government in Stormont. Because if we were getting what was ours and what we were entitled to and treated equally, we wouldn't be looking to join anything else because we would be happy where we are.
Eileen, thank you very much. That was terrific. Thank you. You've excelled yourselves, people on the panel, each of you, because as you know, or else you've been very smart, maybe as well as excelling yourselves. I sent you out a number of questions and we've been through one question and, you know, we're at the end of our first hour. We have another half hour to go. But I remember whenever we talked about the conversation we were about to have, we were quite happy to end it whenever we had finished saying what we had to say. Now, the other couple of questions that I had sent out to you, you've more or less covered. I'll just, for the benefit of the people who are in the audience, I'll just call them out and let them hear the questions. And then I do have a question that I want to go back to each of you on. The second question was to be, what would a woman-friendly constitution look like? Some of you have touched on that. The third was, how does a woman-friendly constitution benefit other marginalised groups? Again, some of you have touched on that. And the last question was, how might the constitution you'd want to see come about? And again, anyone listening can pick up from different people how you each approached that question as well. But here's my last question that occurred to me earlier today. And listening to each of you, I've wondered what your answer would be to this. Are there voices you haven't heard from and would like to hear in this conversation? For example, young people, members of the ex-prisoner community, members of ethnic minorities, women in the Republic. I mean, I'm throwing out those groups of people to you because I think it's notable that I haven't heard many of those people myself, but I'd go back to you and ask you, you know, whose voice do you want to hear in this conversation? Fidelma, whenever I originally imagined this conversation, I was thinking that we would have like 4 questions and I would start each question with a different person, but it's been a long time since we've heard you. So I think it's okay to go back to you, unless anybody wants to jump in at the moment quickly. Anybody else want to jump in at the moment? Go ahead, Fidelma.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to include all groups. And I think that there's consensus among us that it is important. And we know that automatically some groups will be included. They will be automatically included. They won't have to rap a door. They won't have to push the door in. They won't have to scream and shout and say, please, please, please. They'll just be invited in. And then when they're—
Who are they, Fidelma?
I don't want to point fingers at people.
But might they be academics? Might they be academics, for instance?
Academics could be invited in and probably will be invited in, but I'm not sure that the academics will have the same influences as some other groups.
Right.
Now, we know the history of the society, and we know which groups tend to dominate conversations. So, you know, we know how that works. And I think what we're kind of trying to get to is our combined belief here that, I don't want to speak for others, of course, you know what I mean, but just saying it seem to be leaning towards the importance of pluralism in any kind of process, and particularly those whose voices are not heard, and you know, those that are quieter, those who have less power, those who have less influence.
Yeah.
And again, it's, you know, in my mind, we don't know where this issue of constitutional flux is going to go. But the very buried optimist in me thinks that at some stage, as this develops, women actually could be in a stronger position than we think now, because women constitute a voting constituency. And then we might find that people are more interested in patriarchy, in a Bill of Rights, and lots of different things that they were never interested in before, because they may need to court women's votes. So, you know, I think it's good to talk now, and it's good to think things through, because we may be in a completely different position later on down the line. And the beauty of women and including women is that you just don't include women. You include all those other identities that women have. So it's never just including women. It's always including women who have multiple identities. You hear their standpoint. Women will speak from the standpoint of protecting their families, protecting the welfare, the mental health, the socioeconomic well-being. When women speak, they rarely speak for themselves. So in a way, there is patriarchy. I absolutely agree with Catherine. I mean, we're steeped in it at times. But there's also, I think, we need to be careful to recognise that men and women are not two separate categories. Men and women interact all the time, and they're very interdependent groups. So when women are advocating for social change, they're not simply just advocating for this one identity women. That's composed of multiple identities, and they're also advocating for other people in the society that we don't call women as well. Those would be my thoughts, Eilish.
Thank you. Catherine, have you anything to add to this?
Yeah.
You're coming in now, yeah.
So whose voice would I like to hear from?
That's it.
Okay, well, like Eileen said, and a few others said, men as change agents. We need to have change agents within legislation, within government, but we also need to reach the harder to reach women. Those that don't go to women's centres and women's groups and don't partake in you know, classes or courses or things like that. And for me, you know, this whole issue of a constitution, there are other discussions that are needed around the issue of citizenship. You know, and then it takes into bear then the inclusive language that's required, because it's like the Bill of Rights and the language of the Bill of Rights. Some people like it and some people think it's a nationalist agenda. So we have to be very careful if we're talking about inclusive of all and exclusive of none.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. So like when you talk about the north of Ireland, obviously then that's not the language that women from Northern Ireland who are Northern Irish or who see themselves as British like. And if you use the word Northern Ireland and not the North, do you know,
Yes,
so
I
it's
do
so
know.
complex
Yeah.
that it's how it's framed.
Yeah.
It's vital. And a lot of thought would need to go into it, because that's how you'll get all the voices if you do it right. But if we do it wrong and we have one wrong word on it, then you can see a sway leaving away. So that would be my overview of it, is that to get to the harder to reach, we need to begin to think about citizenship, what it's for, who it's for, and then hopefully we'll be able to move it along.
Thank you, Myrtle.
I think we're all pretty much in agreement here. I was smiling when Fidel said about the power of the vote, and remembering that in 1918, the Ulster Unionist Council suddenly granted 10 seats in their council to women of the Ulster Women's Unionist Council, which they'd been asking for ages. But that was all to give more power to the pro-union situation. And I think it's very interesting that all the things that we're talking about in terms of rights or citizenship or a constitution, nothing in it really has got very much to do with what national identity we have. And then we've all got different ones, you know. And these things shouldn't be reliant on national identity, yet those are the only things that our governments seem to be concerned about. And I think that too explains why so many people, as everyone has said, feel remote from the Constitution. It has got nothing to do with them as far as they can see. So there are just too many types of voices, but I think there's a reason why they're not involved, and it's how to make the changes and bring them on board. Bit of a chicken and egg situation, really. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. Susan? Susan, you're on.
Yeah.
You're on.
Yeah, you can hear me. So, in listening to everyone here, I've even said, who speaks for all women? Who speaks for me? It's my voice. And so, if we create something that I don't feel I've been a part of, then it doesn't work. One of the things I was thinking, a bespoke women's constitution. You know, so, but we if we're having the conversation, this conversation's between us. Even if we've the responsibility to take this conversation out further, we can't sit and speak for all women. Women have to speak for themselves. And we always say women have to be heard. So even within the women's sector and the conversation on a constitutional conversation, we can only speak for ourselves. We have to make sure everyone that we can reach is included.
Thank you, Susan. Anne? Anne?
Yeah, I think that in the debate so far, there are voices that are missing. You know, the voices of young people, and I'm starting to put my sort of cynic's head here on now and think about why those voices of young people are absent, and maybe it's because, you know, they think differently from ourselves in terms of what they would like to, you know, in terms of sort of like a political sort of like settlement or whatever. But I back to what Fidel said. I think you have to also recognise the intersectionality, you know, of all. So, you know, we're not just women, you know, we're women who could be disabled, you know, could be, you know, could be a woman of colour, could be, could be like a Protestant or a Catholic or of no religion. So there's that sort of like intersectionality, that we're not here today just because we're women. That's not the only box that we're ticking. And then back to what Susie said, it is about having a process that's inclusive, but also recognising that we live in a democracy. So you can't have everybody at the table. Now I'm not saying, Susie, that you always have to have people speaking on your behalf. I think that that we all need to be as inclusive as possible in trying to get sort of like people to the table and involved in sort of like the conversation and that. So I do think it is about sort of an inclusive process. And I'm thinking here as well, again, there's a lot of good practice that has that has gone on, and is probably still going on. I mean, I'm thinking WRDA a few years ago did a piece of research and produced a booklet, and it was Women at the Heart of Public Consultation. So it was basically sort of like advice to those who are consulting how best to do that in an inclusive way. And also, I mean, it wasn't a bag ball for women either. It was also giving advice to women and saying, if you want to be included, this is maybe what you should be doing. So there's good practice out there. We can do it. But I do think it comes down to have to recognise intersectionality, and I think that we have to, from the our sort of like one determinant has to be that it has to be an agreed inclusive process that we would all all be part of.
Thank you, Anne. Eileen, you get to be last twice in the one panel session, but nevertheless, it's not a bad idea to have the last word.
Just pull something out of the air, and said, no, I'm on a number of committees, as I'm sure a lot of you know, and any committees that I'm on who are talking about issues, we do strive to have everybody around the table. Now, I don't mean everybody. I mean, we have people of BME, we have young people, we have gay. We try to include the biggest part of our communities. Now, you're not going to get them all there, as Anne says, but, if we're expecting other people to have gender balance, then we should make sure as women that we have the right people in the room when we're talking. So we're getting feedback from the young people, we're getting feedback from people from the BME communities and people from the gay and lesbian communities, that we are getting information from them of what they would like and they needs. And that allows me to go to my network and say to my network, hold on, there's nobody around this table from the BME, but I was at a meeting the other day and this is what this girl was saying, so, we can be inclusive to a certain degree. Now, I see something in the chat box there from Mcvicker, and I was talking about maybe we should be looking at a charter of rights and protection. And maybe that's where we should be actually beginning, because we did have the European Charter, that we all liked. Nothing to say that we can't add to it and have that Charter of Rights. So I didn't get reading the end of it because you put too many words in for my wee screen and I wasn't seeing the end of it. But, this is a conversation that has started. And there's already people around the table giving ideas. And that's what happens when you have a group of people from different community backgrounds, different educational levels, different, we get those ideas through at us. And I'm up to trying things, but if there's an easier way to get our rights by making a charter, let's go for it. Let's see what we can do. But again, we had the EU Charter. Let's improve on that for Northern Ireland. And again, language is, because if I say Derry, other people are saying to me, why are you saying Derry? Because it's Londonderry. I says, no, people in Derry call it the Maiden City. So, you mean, there's not many different things of what you actually call Derry. And I've always called it Derry. So don't change it. But, you know, we used to know what religion you were by your name. Now we know what religion you are by saying North of Ireland or Northern Ireland or Derry or Londonderry. And we have to make sure we don't fall into that trap. Get a common language for us all, and then we'll be able to move forward.
Thank you, Eileen. My goodness, now just before I say the final thank yous and conclusion, I'm kind of overwhelmed, really. Do you know the way, Eileen, you were saying, you know, you can always pull out the words whenever you have to. There are some times whenever that's actually very difficult. I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to what all of you have said and maybe put a few words together on it. I apologise to Avila and others who've used the chat box because we've had so much to say that we haven't really had time to take Q&As. This is the first of maybe a set of conversations. We need to keep the conversation going and have different forms of the conversation and different ways of conducting it. But before I do reach my conclusions, I'd like to call Colin Harvey in from Queen's Law, if he is there and if we can see him on screen. Okay, Colin, are you there? No, I don't see him. Isn't technology wonderful when it works slickly and without a question? Okay, well, listen, I'm just going to move to my conclusion. And my conclusion, I just put a few words for myself. On behalf of the Constitutional Conversations Group, and now I'll have to say on behalf of Queen's Law for Colin, I want to thank everyone for attending, everyone for listening. I was part of the listening group. That was a wonderful set of contributions and thoughts that push the boundaries, in my view, of the conversation that I've heard so far. So I want to thank you warmly for that and to ask you to keep responding yes to constitutional conversation invitations that you might receive, because we need to hear your voices and we need to hear more of them. And we could have had this conversation with any one of you for the time we've had. So thank you very much also to Declan Coyle of Queen's for his administrative and technical assistance. Without him, I would have been completely lost. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful International Women's Day for the rest of the day. Get out into the sunshine if you can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.